Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's Retro. We have a pretty exciting show today. I'm so excited because we get to hang out with Misko, one of my favorite people from Builder.io, and he's going to talk about some new stuff that's coming down. Well, it's actually not coming down the pipeline. It's already released. I'm so excited.
Yep. Thank you, Tracy. By the way, you can find Tracy online at Lady Leet. My name's Rob Ocel. You can find me online at Rob Ocel. And in the subtweet, we are going to be talking about tips and tricks for your next interview, whether you are the one giving it or the one taking it. And in the double click, we have a gigantic release day, Tracy. We have two libraries dropping major releases or release announcements, one of which is one that maybe you haven't thought about for 5 years. So definitely make sure to check out the double click to find out which library that is.
I am so excited. Let's get started. Welcome to this week's water cooler. Today we have Misko Hevery joining us from Builder.io. And if you don't know, Misko actually recently left Google, actually quite some time ago. I feel like, oh my gosh, what day is it with us right now? But he's CTO of Builder.io, and oh my gosh, you have been up to a lot of fun. I feel like it's like new playground for you everywhere, just new things every day.
Yes, it is a new playground. It is. I love it. I absolutely love it.
Well, okay, talk to us about like this new thing, this new release that you guys just figured out.
Yeah, so the cool new thing is Partytown, and just to kind of make it clear, this is not, I'm bragging about somebody else's awesome work. So just to be clear, this is Adam Bradley. Adam Bradley did amazing things like Ionic. He's on our team working with us on making the web faster. And so everything I'm going to talk about is really his thunder. And I want to make sure that he gets credited. I'm not taking any credit when I'm not supposed to. But it is so cool that I wanted to talk about it. So what is Partytown? Partytown is a way to run third-party scripts in a web worker. So let's back up a second. Let's say what the problem is. The problem is that if you build a regular page, just white page, nothing on it, right? A completely empty page, and you put Google Analytics on it, well, because your marketing department wants to know who's coming to visit, et cetera, right? Super important stuff. If you put nothing on a white page but Google Analytics, you're already on a precipice of not getting 100 out of 100 on mobile. The simple act of adding Google Analytics basically puts you pretty much on the edge of not being able to score 100 out of 100. It's kind of crazy, right? And this is the thing we want to solve, right? We not only want to be able to build you a site that's amazingly fast, but we want to be able to do it in 100 out of 100 on mobile, and you should be able to bring your analytics with you. So there's a lot of people who kind of claim that they can get 100 out of 100, but then they don't really include things like analytics, which is kind of a big and important piece of the whole puzzle.
Well, because it's usually not just Google Analytics. I swear to God, whenever you run Lighthouse, you're like, okay, what is all this stuff? And it's like 10 different like marketing analytics scripts.
That's right. It's Google Analytics is kind of the most obvious, but like people install scripts that send back exceptions to the server, and there is a huge myriad of them all. And this is not my expertise, so I'm sorry I don't have good examples for you. That people install on their pages in order to get these benefits, and these benefits are substantial. So it's not like it is not something we want to get, we want to skip on. But at the same time, adding them will essentially penalize you in being able to get 100 out of 100 on mobile experience, right? And so at the end of the day, you are slowing down their site. So, last time we talked about Quick and how Quick allows you to build a site without downloading any code. The realization is, even if you build it with Quick and you put Google Analytics on it, you're not going to get 100 out of 100. So this is an important problem to solve. So what do we do, right? What's the magic sauce is really the question. The problem of running a third-party script in a web worker really comes down to the fact that the third-party script wants to talk to your DOM. It wants to set up listeners. It wants to know when you click on stuff so that analytics can be sent to the server. It wants to look at the URL. It wants to maybe look at the cookies or any myriad of other things. And you could recreate all of these things in the web worker, but that recreation is going to be kind of expensive in terms of the amount of source code you have to ship and execute, etc. But even bigger problem is, even if you create the environment inside a web worker, that environment is going to be disjoint from the environment in the main thread. And so when a web worker asks for a cookie or wants to look at the URL, etc., it's not going to be getting the most latest information. It's going to get stale information, right? Or for example, let's say Google Analytics says, I want to be notified whenever you click on something. In a web worker, you're never going to click on anything. So you actually need to set up the listener in the main thread. And this is kind of where the problem is. And the crux of the problem is that we have these things called proxies where we can do all of this thing, but the communication channel between the web worker and the main thread is asynchronous. But Google Analytics assumes that it's synchronous. And therefore, if Google Analytics says something like add event listener, it wants to assume that next line it executes after that, the listener is already present, right? And this is the thing that is hard to do, or essentially impossible to do in a web worker. And this is why people that have tried this, they weren't able to solve this particular problem, and therefore they've given up. So the genius that Adam Bradley is, he figured out, like, well, wait a minute. We have this thing called XML HTTP Requests. And XML HTTP Requests was put in a long time ago by Microsoft. And for whatever reason, they included a synchronous version of that thing. So you can make a XML HTTP request. Oh yeah, Rob's look at his face. He's like,
yeah. Somewhere Dominic is listening to this. Please stop listening for a moment while we talk about synchronous XML HTTP requests.
Right. So,
please,
so the web worker can make a synchronous request and essentially block. Now, normally this is a horrible thing, but this is a web worker. So like, do we care that the web worker is blocking? Like that has no negative effect on a user or the user's perceived latency or anything, right? So by making a synchronous XML HTTP request, we can block the web worker, and therefore we have sufficient amount of time to go talk to the main thread and figure out what the answer should be, and then synchronously deliver that answer to the web worker. So from the point of view of the script running inside of the web worker, it looks normal, nothing special happening here, right? And so the way it actually works is that there is a service worker that intercepts the XML HTTP requests, talks to the main thread, gets the particular information, and delivers it to the web worker.
That is fascinating.
I give kudos to Adam, right? Like this is like creative engineering, like A+ for that.
Yeah, it's funny because it's such a different type of engineering. A lot of times if you're reading thought leaders on Twitter, a lot of these people are builders of the tools. So they get to decide that to add the primitives that enable this. Mm-hmm. I've had a similar experience in my career where I was tasked with building a feature that had to go in a .NET desktop application, and it couldn't be built into the system. So it could only read what the other DLLs exposed publicly. And it was this interesting sort of like experimental hack situation where you were just trying to grab anything public you could, give people anything that you could grab that would let them do the thing that they wanted to do. And it sounds like that's a similar process here. You can't invent a new web worker primitive or a new service worker primitive, but you can grab those public levers and produce the same effect that you need. That's super fascinating.
Yeah, so we can do this now. We can launch Google Analytics in a separate web worker, and everything works. It registers listeners. It looks at cookies. It inserts a hidden image pixels. And the way we do that is that we don't try to simulate the environment of the main thread. Instead, through proxies, we literally expose every single primitive to the main thread as a web worker thread. Right. So whether the thing wants to look at the URL or wants to look at the cookies or anything, we through proxies just make it available to you, and everything becomes available. Now, the nice side effect of all this stuff is that you can now observe what the third-party script is doing. You can actually watch. It's like, oh, it's adding these things. It's setting up listeners.
It's sandboxed basically.
Exactly. Yeah. Because it's sandboxed, you can decide like, you know what? I see you're reading cookies. I don't think so. You can just say like, just return empty list, like pretend there's no cookies, right? The script doesn't know any better. Oh, no cookies, that's fine. Like continue running. And then you can sandbox these scripts and you can make sure, because on the end of the day, this is not your code, right? This is third-party code that you're including on your website, and you're just magically trusting that it won't do anything evil.
Which it's totally always making your site slower.
Right?
And it's never good.
But now it's in a sandbox. And because it's in a sandbox, you can decide that certain things are not allowed to be done over there and so on and so forth.
That is magical.
I know. And it gives you 100 out of 100. And we pitched this to the Chrome team, and they were like, okay, I see it. Like, mainly we wanted to make sure that they won't come back tomorrow and say like, yeah, but you're really cheating and you shouldn't be doing that and blah, 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 right? But even then they were like, well, you are actually improving the experience for the user, right? Your app starts up faster because now we have offloaded this thing on a separate thread. But not only do we offload it on a separate thread, we can actually slow down the thread a little bit. We can basically process the requests that are coming in from the separate thread and only process those requests when we are ourselves, the main thread, not busy. So we automatically get the benefit of like, yes, it's booting up in a separate thread, but it's not, using up all the CPU. It's only doing it while the main thread is not busy.
So is this going to be like the next like Chrome Dev Summit / Google I/O? Like this is the new standard to use?
Well, I mean, I think if your goal is to improve user experience, which I think all of our goals should be, right? Then anything that you can do to improve the startup time is a worthwhile goal pursuing. And our realization is that we need to be able to do this for third-party scripts. Otherwise, we can't get 100 out of 100, right? And that is the thing that we're going, like, there should be no reason why a website, no matter the complexity, cannot get 100 out of 100 by using these tricks.
Well, from my understanding, I know that synchronous XML HTTP requests is in the crosshairs of the standards team for potential elimination from the platform. So get this thing in there and make sure it's a breaking change as soon as possible. So we keep
the reason we're using XML HTTP request is because it is supported through the most number of platforms. But actually, there is a second primitive that only supports on some of the platforms that does the same exact thing. So there are these things called atomics, which is basically a shared array buffer that you can share between the main thread and the web worker thread. And through atomics, you can get the two threads to block on each other and get the same exact thing. And obviously, atomics is a much, much better way to do it, but it's just not available everywhere just yet. So we chose to implement it using a lower level primitive. But even if this lower level primitive were to disappear, we only need it in a web worker thread, not in the main thread. In the main thread, there really is no good reason to ever block because like, you're kind of messing it up for the user. But remember, there is no visible thing on the web worker thread. And so blocking there has no negative connotations. Like we took the negative connotations of blocking is bad and we transferred it over to the web worker thread because, well, it's bad here. It's probably bad over there too, right? But it turns out if you think about it, like, yes, it's bad on the main thread, but there's no reason why it should be bad in the other thread because there's no UI. The user doesn't get to wait or anything of that sort, right? So there's nothing bad about that. And atomics is a way to do that without relying to this kind of XML HTTP request.
Okay, so like where do we find more information about all of this?
It is on the GitHub, the Builder.io GitHub. It has a /Partytown is the URL for it. We have just kind of launched it. We're trying to get it. It's already running on our About page. Soon it's going to be running on our main page. We're just kind of slowly rolling it out, make sure there's no surprises. And our goal is to make sure that it works with the standard set of things that people use, whether it's Google Analytics, Intercom, HubSpot, I think is another common one, right?
Yeah.
So the idea is that we add all of these support for all these things into it so that it just kind of works out of the box.
Cool. And here's a little, did that let me share that? No, it doesn't let me share that. But anyways, you can check out partytown.vercel.app as well to kind of check that out. But
I love that name too.
Yes, I do love that name. Well, this is so much fun. Y'all are having so much fun out there. Definitely check out Builder.io and Misko. I saw recently that you and Adam are doing, is it weekly updates? You guys are doing weekly updates, is that right?
Yeah, we started doing a weekly kind of office hours for Quick. To kind of, I kind of built a kind of a prototype of Quick, and I showed it to a lot of people, and I got a lot of wonderful feedback, especially from Kent Dodds. He gave me a lot of insightful things about, what he likes about different frameworks, especially what he likes about React and so on. And I was able to incorporate many of those things in there. So kind of in the process of rearranging the stuff in the framework. And one of the things I wanted to do is to show people the progress that we have been doing. Unfortunately, because it's kind of a major rearrangement, you can't really do it in pieces. So I've been kind of a bit of a hermit in a corner here and rearranging everything. But I think it's almost done. And I'm really liking the resulting output. It's way simpler. It's way better syntax, way more succinct syntax, which I think is the key thing for the developers. And it will have even better performance characteristics. So thanks for everybody who's giving me this wonderful feedback. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, definitely follow Misko on Twitter. And I think it was today, even a few hours ago, like Adam was like, we're live on Google Meet. So, you can join them, hang out, talk to them. And you definitely want to be like in all this exciting stuff. We're super excited about it. So I hope we get to talk a lot more about it on some of our things. And thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And now it's time for the double click, the part of the show where we share with you the really cool things that we've been playing with in the last week, Tracy. And today we have a twofer. We have one that we're going to talk about briefly and another one, which is huge. And the one that we're going to talk about briefly is the little engine that could. jQuery UI popped out of the woodwork. And after 5 years, almost to the day, announced the release of their 1.13.0 release candidate. Version 2, and they describe what happened to release candidate 1 inside the blog post that announced it. But, we were talking to some people on staff about this, and one of the first responses was, well, is there actually a valid use case nowadays for jQuery UI? And to be honest, a surprisingly large amount of sites still run. I mean, say surprisingly, like if you've been in tech Twitter or whatever, and you think everything is React nowadays or Angular or Vue, no, like the biggest bulk of the web runs on jQuery. And a lot of those
finally it got some love.
Yeah, jQuery UI is great if you need to implement some of these things that probably should exist in the platform but don't, but you don't want to necessarily have to pull in a whole framework to support it. Mm-hmm. It's still a great library to get some stuff up and running. Like, I'm so glad that they're updating it. It takes away a lot of the issues that people were having with some of the later versions of jQuery and deprecation warnings that they were getting using UI. So they're doing this version as sort of an upgrade, a glow up, if you will. And then the next version, they might do some breaking. Up. Yeah, the next version, they might do some breaking changes to correct some stuff that they wanted to improve. Hey, awesome! 5 years later, the framework is alive. It's alive! So congratulations to the jQuery UI team.
I love one of the comments. Thanks to all involved, the dead live longer.
The king is dead, long really live funny. The king.
I love that. I love that.
Now, in other news, this is a little bit more core to some of the work that we do these days. It was announced, they had a big ceremony at the day that we're recording this, the launch of Lit 2.0.
Woohoo!
Yeah, the Lit team, which, if you're not super
with
familiar with
logo.
Lit, yep, their new logo. And Lit is a way to implement web components in a very straightforward way, in a very, in a way that has a lot of developer experience features built into it. It feels like using a React or an Angular or a Vue, but it's to build out web components. If you've ever heard of the library Polymer, and so if you've heard Polymer, web components, how is this different? Lit is sort of the spiritual successor of Polymer. So the Polymer team it's not that they've abandoned Polymer, but they've sort of adopted Lit as the sort of banner carrier, the standard bearer for web components in the official capacity. So this is now the recommended framework for building web components. If you don't have an existing Polymer library, use Lit. But this new version, Tracy, is amazing.
Is it? What do you like the
Yes.
best about it? I mean, I'm really loving this interaction on the site right now, but
Okay, so you've hit on probably one of the best, right? It's not going to be amazing to everybody, but the new doc site is phenomenal. Not only will the documentation look as good as you have it right there, where it's highlighting things, and they've re-updated all the old documentation.
it's so
which, to be perfectly honest, it needed it. So when we're talking about glow ups, the doc's got a glow up too. And they added a playground so that you don't even have to download anything, install anything, or deploy anything. You can build lit element, lit web components directly in browser. And you can see examples of how to use other parts of the API. So on the left, you can pull in sample code and play around with it. Amazing. Amazing. Bravo to the Lit team on this. This is a massive release.
I love it. That is really awesome.
It's also incredibly small. It's 6 KB, which is a wafer thin cost for getting the developer experience of a near JSX-like type of syntax. You know, if you know React, this will feel very similar in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I love that you can this playground is awesome. I mean, playgrounds are just so necessary, I feel like, these days, to just really be able to get in there. You know, it's like you want to, try before you buy, in a sense. And a lot of times, if you're building a framework, definitely check out, making sure you're incorporating some sort of playground. RxJS playground would be good. I mean, that's why StackBlitz is also great, right? Because you can just incorporate StackBlitz and play around with something. But I love this built-in experience. It's probably on GitHub too, right? Like, we were probably can we fork that playground? I'm there, I'm doing it.
On one of these double clicks, I'm going to have to share my RxJS playground favorite. But yeah, so the other part of Lit. So if you haven't been enticed, you said, you know what, I don't need it yet. I've heard bad things about web components. First of all, ignore the haters. It's worth investigating. It's actually, we've used it on a couple different projects. It's absolutely, for anybody that's worked on a project with
big enterprise projects.
Exactly, at tremendous scale. And we were actually able to integrate a lot of what we built into other Angular products, other React products, other Lit exclusive products. So it was a very effective sort of ability to work across frameworks like that. But there was one thing that was always a little bit troubling. And it was, for example, in some of the components we were building, we were using Redux. And one of the common pitfalls of the developers would be that in Lit, you didn't have the automatic bindings that you have in either React or Angular to automatically re-render your components when the Redux store updated. Well, one of the new additions in Lit 2.0 are these things that they call reactive controllers. And these reactive controllers have the ability to tap into lifecycle methods of the parent and force re-renders. So that now makes it possible to create Redux reactive controllers that can subscribe to certain parts of the state and update when those parts change, which I'm sitting here now going, how many hours would I have saved with that feature? It is so cool. It's very similar to React hooks or the Vue composition API. It's different, but it'll have a lot of the same feel. And again, that's what I love. You're getting platform features with a wafer thin wrapping library with the developer experience of the frameworks that you've been using on other products. It's an exciting time to get into it. So,
but I think the thing I love, Rob, is even if nobody understood what the hell you were talking about, they'd be like, Rob's excited. I'm excited. Let's go check this out. Because you're so excited about it. It's awesome. And the way you explain it is amazing too.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, my only complaint with it is with the shadow DOM, and we do not have time right now to go into it. We might have to have a whole subtweet or something about shadow DOM and web components, but there are some differences from developing in frameworks, but to be perfectly honest, most of which you will not encounter. It is it is something that is going to be well supported going forward, and I think going to be increasingly important to have some support for web components at some level in your solution, even if you're building it with Angular or React and not with Lit. This can be the way that you can start to learn what that is and how that feels as it interops. So definitely check it out. Now's a great time because there'll be a lot of people doing it with you and willing to share those lessons. And the Lit team is very responsive and open to people joining the community, very willing to sit down with you and your team to understand, your particular use cases and how the framework can help you. So
especially enterprises, it's like great for you to, like, if you're an enterprise company, especially since Lit is done by Google, like they're always looking to talk to their customers more and figure out use cases and figure out how to improve that experience for enterprise clients. So it's so easy to reach out to them. And if you need help with that, just let us know too. We're happy to do a tweet intro or whatever. So I'm excited. I'm definitely going to check it out and play around with it tonight.
Great. So, let us know how you get along with Lit. Leave in the comments down below if you've used it before, if you've played with it, or what your favorite sort of non-traditional or non-standard framework that you've been playing with lately that we should be checking out after we get done playing with Lit and playing with the new jQuery UI updates. Let us know in the comments down below.
Okay, I'm looking to see lots of blog posts, by the way, on jQuery UI, like how-tos on jQuery UI, like this is the new renaissance. Like screw all the other frameworks. We're going to see like jQuery UI with like 100,000 GitHub stars like tomorrow. It's going to be amazing.
And now it's time for the Subtweet, the part of the show where we talk about the things that, we've been talking about online and give you the context that you need to have deeper, more productive conversations about it. And today, Tracy, we are talking about interview hacks.
Okay.
In other words, we are talking about an article that made a major splash recently from CNBC telling you about the one secret tip in interviews that you don't realize that you're violating that's costing you jobs. And it turns out it's actually more than one. For example, it says that people that swear in interviews are much more likely to be instantly declined in the minds of their interviewees. Some people said that they are watching their posture and their sort of their eye contact. Other people, one of the other suggestions in the article was to try and build a rapport and find things that you have in common with the person that's interviewing you in order to come off as more approachable, as more likable, and as somebody they would want to work with them.
I like those. No?
Yeah, no, I think they're all valid tips. And a lot of the reaction came down to this idea that why should interviewers who already have all the power be kowtowed to by interviewees? It should be the other way around. Interviewers should be going out of their way to accommodate interviewees. So in conclusion, I think, one of the things that you want to be mindful with any of these things is to take this advice on hand. But again, not to think that your interviewer is infallible or perfect or that you are less than and need to prove yourself. It does work both ways. You do want to come off as the best version of you can present. But if you're an interviewer in this job market, the reverse is also true. You better have read that person's resume because you know what? Those interviewees know when you haven't, and they do not want to work with you. You better ask relevant questions. You'd better, give good feedback after the fact if it's requested. The fact is that now more than ever, the interviewers must sell their company as much as the interviewees need to sell their talents. But the point is, both people should probably be looking to put their best foot forward, and having articles like this, which at least give you some things that maybe you weren't aware of, although maybe some of this is pretty basic advice. It's a relatively harmless article from that perspective. Again, with the caveat that you should never try to tamper a part of yourself away, because ultimately you're going to be who you are in the work environment. Get through the door however you need to get through the door, but don't compromise yourself or misrepresent yourself to be something that you're not, because you'll never be happy in that work environment. If you were only accepted,
like I like waking up at 6 a.m. It's like, okay, that's a job requirement. Oh my God, I'm never showing up at 6 a.m. Like,
now I have to get up every morning at 6 a.m. Right? Like that's a very functional version of that. Exactly.
Yeah.
But it could be like, oh sure, wear a suit to your interview. But if you don't ever want to wear a suit, don't work at a job. Don't apply at a job where you're going to have to wear a suit. So there's a difference between putting a good foot forward and defining yourself in a way that is not who you are. And so this is just one of those scenarios where I think both people are right. I think take the feedback where you can to increase your odds of getting your job, especially your first job, especially if you're a career changer. Getting that first job is so critical. Whatever you can do to increase your odds is great, but please do not think that you need to prove yourself worthy to your interviewer. Make them prove themselves worthy to you, because to be honest, as somebody who's done interviews, somebody who demands that I prove that I'm worth working with, it is weirdly a good thing. Like it comes off as somebody that really is interested in working with you because they have standards.
Right.
And all of a sudden I'm sitting there like, oh, I hope they liked us. As the interviewer. That's great. Take that,
but not in an aggressive way. Like,
don't.
I mean, I think like some of the other things is, it's weird because like, do I care if the interviewee has questions after the interview or not? No, I don't really care. But the ones who do have questions, for some reason, I'm like, well, that person seemed interested. And it's like, did I care that they didn't? Did I care that they did? I don't know. For some reason, because they had questions, it seemed like they were more interested. Or as an interviewee, I think especially if you're interviewing with HR people, and you've done no research on the company, the HR person is probably not going to let you through as much as if you've done some research and you show that you actually care about the job and you care about the place you're going to work. So those are some easy hacks that are super easy, nothing crazy, right? But shockingly helpful, and who knows why, right? It's just a perception thing.
It's biases. I mean, it's just all biases. We have a million biases in a million different directions. Another one is if you're a very introverted person, it may not seem it through this camera, but I'm a very introverted person. You might need to learn to at least affect a bit of a more outgoing personality in the constraints of that interview process. Because again, it's not like they're going to hire you with the note, well, if he ever shows off to be introverted, make sure he gets fired, right? But you want to come off as personable, as likable, because it does play off of those biases. You don't, it's not my job to play off of those biases. It's not my job to meet those biases, but I can take advantage of those biases and take a little bit of power back. And if you can do it in ways where you feel empowered when you're doing it, and that's the key, is do the things, know what button you're pushing on the interviewer, push it skillfully, reap the reward, and then go on your merry way. But don't feel like you need to become that model. And, try some of these things and, be aggressive and see if that works. And if it doesn't, that's okay. It's just I feel like, again, it's just like going on a bunch of first dates, be super aggressive. You're like, whoa, I was too aggressive. Better not do that again. Make mistakes. It's okay. Test things out on different people. I think that's why doing interviews with companies you don't even care about is important, because you're just hanging out, so that when you find that perfect company that you want to work for, you kind of have honed your skill of interviewing. And the last piece I'll say here is, if you're an interviewer, take from this, read articles like this on what interviewees are being told, and then incorporate that into your review processes. Read an article like this and go, oh, wow, do we really judge people based on posture? And the next time you feel really negatively about someone, note I think it's because of their posture. They were slouching really weirdly. I could not get past that. Like, am I having an issue with their posture or with their qualifications? Talk that out. Make sure you have like more than one person involved in the hiring process so that you can bounce those things off of each other and talk through those biases. It will make sure you do not miss out on candidates that you don't need to. And that's so valuable. You know where it's most valuable? With non-native speakers. Non-native speakers get such a bias against them because they don't exude confidence in their non-native language. We have hired some amazing people because we looked past what seemed like a lack of interest or a lack of confidence or a lack of talent. And all it was is once they were comfortable with the team and their non-native language, that was all that was blocking them. Like, they're amazing developers, amazing people. They add so much to the culture, but they face that uphill bias. And if you can deprogram yourself as a interviewer, you will have access to talent you did not realize was there, that you were excluding for completely arbitrary reasons. It was a total waste of your time.
Love it. And we're hiring.
And we're hiring, yeah. We try to be mindful of these biases, so please look us up. Now, let us know down in the comments below, what was the weirdest interview story that you've ever had, the weirdest rejection, the weirdest question, the weirdest request that you got. And if you're an interviewer, maybe, share some of the silliest stories, your questions or your interviews gone wrong down in the comments below. If there's any super interesting ones, we'll make sure to highlight them in a future episode.
Thanks everyone for joining us for this week's Retro. We hope you had a ton of fun. I swear that conversation with Misko was so awesome. It got so technical and so just like fun. So I hope you guys get to check out all the stuff that Builder.io is doing. I mean, they're just doing a lot of really cool open source stuff these days. It's like a playground over there for them.
I love how Misko just gets you excited about whatever he's talking about. Like,
Seriously.
It doesn't even matter, right? Like, you just always leave very excited about whatever it is that he's got inside his mind that day. But yeah, so as we like to say, the conversation doesn't need to stop here. So down in the comments below or on Twitter, let us know what your favorite segment was from today's show. Certainly let us know how you've been getting along with Lit or jQuery UI, whether you've updated and checked out the new release candidate. And of course, as always, let us know who you want us to interview on future episodes, because we'd love to hear your feedback and we'd love to get the guests that you want to hear from the community. Yes, so exciting. We hope to see you next week on Retro. See you soon. Bye-bye. It's very natural.